Hello. Apologies, my mic was muted there for a moment. Welcome to One Great Earth, where we use satellite imagery and time lapses to get an area of interest. We look at sea ice, we look at wildfires, we look at forests, we look at wetlands. If it's able to be understood under satellite and shared, we also cover calamities, catastrophes, major floods, and war. I've been meaning to get back into the swing of things when it comes to Ukraine, but Ukraine government wish everybody. I lost a lot of contacts. It's no problem, but that information, is never going to return. Like after the counteroffensive, nothing. Not like it used to be. It's fine. It is their war. I need to do more talking about it. In the lulls that, in the seasons of fire around the southern hemisphere, it would. What we have here is Al Jazeera. This is their website. People are afraid to leave the hospital because they hear reports of being shot at. An Al Jazeera Arabic correspondent and a photojournalist working with him have been wounded in an Israeli airstrike near Rafah in southern Gaza. And that's where we're going today. Israel, all the way to this little area here called the West Bank. I'm sorry, I was looking at the West Bank and said West Bank. Gaza Strip. West Bank is to the east. But West Bank satellite imagery doesn't show the 6,000 plus detainees. Going up. Israel can harm civilians in Rafah without consequences from U.S. report. The U.S. media outlet Politico has reported that the Biden administration will not pursue consequences for Israel if the country proceeds with an anticipated assault on Rafah, despite Washington's demands that Israel develop a plan to avoid civilian casualties before launching the operation. The report, which cites 3 anonymous officials in the Biden administration, states that no reprimanded plans are in the works, meaning Israeli forces could enter the city and harm civilians without facing American consequences. While the U.S. has said that an Israeli assault on the city, whose population has increased 5 times as Israel instructed displaced Palestinians to seek refuge there, would be a disaster. The Biden administration has pushed back against suggestions that the Israeli incursion there could jeopardize continued U.S. arms transfer. So a population in Rafah of 275,000 people, 1.2 to 1.4 million people converge that are still walking south to Rafah from Khan Yunis. From people walking, looking for food, children on their own, orphans are no shelter, no safe place to go. You believe Netanyahu when he says that this is going to be a huge strike? I imagine he's saying huge numbers because the population density is number 1 in the world for Rafah right now. Any bombings, any strikes could potentially kill in the tens of thousands. There's over 1.4 million people that are being war refugees in their own country, their own state. You got the northern side all locked away, destroyed, evacuated like this before. They drop leaflets where they tell people to go over loudspeakers and drones, telling people to leave, calling them animals. It's not that they're suggesting people to leave for their own safety in these hospital systems that are currently being waged siege on. Snipers taking out even children. They don't care. They do not care. They call them animals. They're rounding them up in massive groups. The men that get rounded up by Israeli soldiers usually don't survive. The women and children do, but they're put aside, and then a tank shell goes through the wall whenever the IDF leaves the building. These are, people keep saying, it's only going to escalate to the point of the US actually doing something. I would have thought the credit rating adjustment would have sent shockwaves through Israel. I would have thought that losing Palestinians as indentured workers, capitalizing on the slavery of the Palestinian people, but they'll move to other peoples. They'll take time, but credit rating getting downgraded, I would have thought had more effect. It's the first thing that anybody's ever pushed back on Israel as a result of this in Rafah. Amount of death and destruction. We will look at scans, slides, time lapses of Gaza. You can see the absolute destruction of the entire region. All eyes on Rafah. Number of Palestinians detained in West Bank exceeds 7,000. These get arrest figures up to 220 women, 440 children, and 53 journalists at that time. Journalists seriously injured in Israeli drone strike in Rafah. U.S. Senate passes bill with $14.1 billion for Israel. UNRWA funding ban. $95 billion for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. I believe some of that was for Gaza, but not going to mark any of that for Palestinian refugees. Terrible if true. Hamas leader living a life of luxury underground in tunnels. They're going to find all these tunnels. That isn't question. Question is, how far do these tunnels actually extend? What's the extent of these tunnel systems that are just under the UNRWA building? The UNRWA building. They were apparently sharing electricity and networking. A lot of questions, but instead of proceeding with investigation, instead of proceeding with talk, diplomacy, anything at all, putting this information in the ICJ, why have all these things that Israel's uncovered during this war, have they not put any of this information as evidence against themselves that this is all for something, this is leading towards something, Still, it's 72% of those killed Israel. I'm sorry, 72% of those killed by Israel in Gaza were 28,000 people. 72% of those people that were killed were women and children. From what I have read, women don't make up Hamas, and children, unless a teenager, makes up Hamas. Intense fighting near Khan Yunis hospitals, Rafah hospitals, overwhelmed. The UN humanitarian agency, OCHA, reports that continued intense fighting near the Nasser and Al-Ma hospitals in Khan Yunis is putting medical staff, wounded and sick patients, and internally displaced people at risk. Al-Ma hospital continues to contend with acute shortages of fuel and medical supplies and currently has only one functional operating room, OCHA has also reported. As we reported earlier, OCHA also shared a Ministry of Health in Gaza report that Nasser building has sustained damage to its ceilings due to nearby explosions and sewage leaking into the emergency department. Meanwhile, OCHA says that hospitals in neighboring Rafah have been overwhelmed by the influx of Palestinians seeking refuge there. 275,000 people was the population of Rafah, and then 1.4 million people are added to that population, seemingly over a week. There's so many people in Khan Yunis, while Israel destroys the eastern side of it and works their way west. If you're just joining us, this is some of the most recent headlines. Releasing Palestinian prisoners is now the main gap as truce negotiations continue. A U.S. funding bill which bans funding to UNRWA and gives $14.1 billion to Israel has been adopted by the U.S. Senate and will now go to vote in the Congress. So that should pass the House, right? Why is it when Republicans were the majority in the Senate, House was always the first to pass the bills and the Senate declined every bill? It's going hopefully not be debated any longer. This is a lot of aid. Taiwan to Ukraine is all tied up in one giant lump sum. Israeli forces have arrested more than 7,000 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank since October 7th. Rafah is displaced. We are at our last prayers. Every night, dozens of displaced people have left Rafah City in recent days after Israeli intensified shelling and airstrikes. Made to go south, but only during specific corridors. Only where they were telling people where to go, but they were telling them to go south, go to Rafah. Israel wants to kill the eyewitnesses and journalists. Yes, there's been over 130 journalists killed since October the 7th. It is frightening. Absolutely frightening. Four of those were Israeli journalists. This is absolute madness. And the speed at which it happens is unbearable. The 100, we were just talking about this. That's nearly one journalist killed every day in Gaza. Soldiers are shooting at everything in sight, including a doctor and a nurse. There are bodies in the courtyard. Those people were killed after being told to evacuate. The situation is extremely overwhelming for people inside the facility right now. Nasser Hospital. There's no fuel, no medical supplies, no oxygen, and therefore no surgeries. There's also a sewage flood as the facility is without electricity. Nasser Hospital should be evacuated due to, well, under normal circumstances, sewage flooding in the emergency room would shut it down. More than 7,000 people are believed to be trapped under the rubble. Not just 7,000 people trapped under the rubble. Talking about 7,000 people that were under the rubble that the IDF bulldozes, that runs tanks over, that smash it up. Do you think they're looking for remains or survivors? People could live for days under the rubble, trapped, stuck, unable to move. And then here comes noise, help, and instead it just flattens the entire area. 4,900 of the 7,000 missing people are women and children. It is a scary figure. Women and children that are dead, killed in a war that was started on October 7th for what everybody assumed the best intentions. But some of us knew that the bullet that was taken from Abu Akla Al Jazeera correspondent Shireen Abu Akla. This is this not showing up here on the top. Let me bring it down a little bit. This article is I'll read this. The bullet from Shireen Abu Akleh was given to the U.S. government as proof of a war crime. Ever since then, just kind of knew that there's not going to be any pushback to what they were doing, since they literally shot the voice of Israel, the voice of Palestine. In the past hour, the Israeli military ordered people, 300 medical staff, 450 patients, and hundreds of displaced Palestinians to leave Nasser Hospital. They destroyed the northern gate of the hospital and blocked it with piles of sand and rubble. Only the eastern gate is open now. There are tanks and armored vehicles stationed in front of that gate. There are face recognition cameras installed at the eastern gate of the hospital. From past experience, setting up face recognition cameras and high-tech equipment means raids and mass arrests are soon going to happen. Israeli protesters block aid bound for Gaza. Blocking fuel and food. This is what we were saying here in the Moody's last week. Their Israeli credit rating cut. People are going to assume that they'll recover quickly because of the war. Mike Pompeo visited and danced with Israeli soldiers in the... Oh my god. We lost hope. We lost everything. Gaza City residents struggle to cope. This is by Muhammad R. Mawish. Gaza Strip. Gaza City. Mahmoud Murtaja returned to his home in eastern Gaza City. Was as heartbreaking as his forced departure had been when the Israeli army began its ground offensive into the city about 3 months ago. Although bombardments have not stopped, Murtaja thought returning to their home might bring him and his family some comfort, finally breaking the cycle of endless temporary evacuations. But when he arrived where his home had been, his hopes were swiftly dashed. His 3-story house was nowhere to be seen. In its place were only piles of dirt and blackened rubble. We had heard that our area was subjected to heavy fire from Israeli artillery and air attacks during the ground assault. We certainly expected to see some destruction, but we didn't imagine that the house would be completely destroyed and we would have to search through the dirt for our belongings to identify where it had been. We couldn't even find any trace of walls or a roof. The family of 5 now live in a cloth tent erected on the rubble of what was their home. According to Mirja, there is now nothing that impedes his view from the tent 4 kilometers around. Everything has been flattened. The tent provides some shelter from the rain, but no protection from the fighting, no privacy, or enough cover to keep them warm at night. Murtaja, 9-year-old daughter Salma, described the terror of fleeing approaching Israeli tanks. She had dreamt of going home and finding some peace from the crowded shelter in Gaza's south. Ultimately, she found herself sleeping on the ground in a small 6 square meter or 65 square foot tent where she thinks her room may once have stood. I can't even sleep. It's like sleeping on the street but with pain and tears all day long. All I want is my room, my dolls, and my clothes back. For the family, the journey back to their house, was long and traumatic. Salma's mother, Rafah, said. Now, with the loss of their home, Rafah feels none of them will ever know security again. For us, losing the family home felt like losing our soul while we were still alive. And that's the most painful feeling a human can experience. Murtaja was a driving instructor before the war, told Al Jazeera that's when they first left home he thought they would only be gone a few days. He never thought they would return to rubble. Now the Murtaja family must split up every morning. Some search for wood to burn, while others comb the area for water. Most days their efforts yield nothing, and they return to the tent empty-handed, meaning no food or water for the day. For families like the Murtajas, living on the remains of their flattened properties in the north of Gaza, the nights are not only cold but also terrifying. Nearby explosions shake the ground they live on, while stray dogs bark and yelp outside, adding to the family's terror. As the war enters its 5th month, thousands of Palestinian families across the Gaza Strip have lost their homes and become displaced, refugees in their own lands. In the north, entire families have been scattered by the war, shattering the community demographically and geographically. Murtaja feels his sense of belonging to the world has been severed. They need aid. More than that, he says they need their basic humanity to be acknowledged. We need to feel like equal people who can enjoy the basics of their human rights, like safety, dignity, freedom, and justice. Love to rebuild his house, and he has some hope that the international community may one day respond to the plight of the people of Gaza. But he says this next time he prays that the reconstruction comes with a guarantee that when he rebuilds his house, it will not be destroyed in the blink of an eye while the world sits silent. I had started to feel hopeful about a possible ceasefire taking effect soon. But after I lost my house, the house that I spent ages building and maintaining, I lost hope, and I don't think I need it anymore. Murtaja now believes that any ceasefire would be too little too late for his family, whose sense of security has forever been destroyed. I don't think it would make much of a difference to us if they announced a ceasefire now. Unfortunately, we lost everything. We lost hope. The less red and gray you see, the scan's harder to see. Wow. You can see gone. Oh my god, I don't know how long I was muted for. I apologize. What's gonna happen now that these areas, these regions, districts that are being told to evacuate, they're going nowhere. Any further north and Khan Yunis is too dangerous, too deadly. The fighting is always everywhere. was a rather haunting piece made by people that just want to go home. Rafah assault would be fulfillment of Israeli promise to flatten the strip. While Israel has said that it will seek the evacuation of the hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians trapped in Rafah before launching a military operation there, Middle East specialist Hafsa Halawal says Israel's destructive campaign has rendered much of Gaza unlivable. Where will these 1.3 to 1.4 million people go? They're not going to. They're going to kill everybody. They have no reason to expect Israel to pull out now or to not go ahead with what they have planned in Rafah. It's going to become a huge crowd crush as 1.4 million people escape violence once again. This time all at once, in the hundreds of thousands, probably in the night. This is terrifying. And I thank you for liking the stream and subscribing to the channel. Okay. Try to go live at least once a day. Alright. Thank you. Take care.